ModPo has come to Seattle, Washington, and I'm standing in front of the famous Pike Place Market, where the fishmongers famously sing out when someone buys a fish, and if we're lucky, it'll happen while I'm talking here. In a little while, we're going to go to our hotel where it'll be quiet and not so rainy, and we're going to meet with Larissa Lai, who is situated now, currently teaching and writing her poetry in Calgary, but she is really a Vancouverite. And it's true that ModPo is also going to be traveling up the road to Vancouver pretty soon. And we could have met with Larissa there, but it happens that she's in Seattle for the Modern Language Association Conference. So we're going to go in a few minutes to our hotel suite, meet with Larissa. We're going to be talking about a poem by Roy Miki. The poem is called I Hear You. Roy Miki is a Japanese-Canadian poet, very eminent, and he also loves Vancouver, and it's really a Vancouver poem. So let's just say that it's appropriate we're here because it's a Pacific Northwest conversation. So let's go back to the hotel and talk with Larissa. So Larissa Lai, hi.
Hi, Al.
I'm so glad that we decided to have a conversation about Roy Miki.
Me too. Thanks so much for being interested in him and his work.
Well, I mean, led by you back to, I've done a little bit of Roy Miki reading, but now I've read all of Flow.
You read the whole thing?
I read the whole thing. Well, I mean, I didn't read every poem closely, but yeah, it's amazing. It's a big book put out by Talon Books.
Like this.
Right? And toward the end of it is the poems from a book called Cloudy and Clear.
That's right.
A real Vancouver title,
that's right.
isn't it?
And it's a new collection as well.
2018.
So when they were putting the compendium together, it was all old work, except for Cloudy and Clear.
So it's kind of a collected, new and collected.
New and collected.
Right, exactly. Is that what they call it?
Yeah.
And it's called Flow, and the preface is called The Floward.
I didn't even notice that.
By Louis Cabri.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, Floward. It's a beautiful book, and we'll have occasion in this video to talk a little bit more about Roy Miki's career and life. But we've got a poem that you have chosen that I have celebrated the choice of, called I Hear You.
I Hear You.
And what we're going to do now is you and I are going to read it section by section, alternating sections. Would you start section 1 and then I'll do 2 and we'll go back and forth?
Sure, sounds good.
Okay. This is called I Hear You. Roy Miki, M-I-K-I, from Cloudy and Clear.
So I hear you. 1. The oblique truth, envy by another name, tossed in assortment, we dig deeper than our we dig deeper than our competitors. Pliancy forever is our motto, waist deep in whatever. Any time now, raise your hand, finagle it.
2. We lie down at peace, our lobes on loan. Credit rules the nest. Seeped into channels, don't mess with it.
3. The voice says, fault is not ours. Fault done them in. Fault never lies. Fault has its confidants. Fault revels, not reveals.
Section 4. I was not aware of the dispossession kept in storage. All we received, held as our own, it was the zone of least resistance. Now that we know, let's hit the road again for the late night show.
5. The fulcrum, 5. The fulcrum, eye turns as it surveys. And why not? Who made thee, little lamb? We consume, ergo we fudge. The sooth equals, the wallow equals, the gambit of the whole enchilada.
6. Imagine a nest of circuitous roots. Imagine destination as a slew of words. Imagine definition as a booby trap. We came along for the ride. We learn at intervals to abide.
7. All the alabaster in the distance, pipelines pump muzak. All refrain, refine your tongue. The wretched corset of a sentence, the plumb line doesn't lie down.
8. Passes give us options. Options give us optics. Optics give us... Larissa, I think this is the kind of poetry that not only rewards, but maybe even requires such close attention.
It really does.
Because there's... So why don't we start by looking at section 6 and just seeing where we get with it. My first question is this compelling, but I can't quite fully get it, parallel of destination and definition.
Oh,
right?
Interesting.
Yeah, because definition is to be, we are imagining it as a booby trap. Clearly there's some warning about things being too well defined.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then because we know, and we'll talk about it more deep in Roy Miki's biographical psyche, is the trauma of knowing that he was intern as a Japanese Canadian.
That's right. So that definition, enemy alien, right, is the one that kind of begins and constrains his life.
Yeah.
So there would necessarily be this suspicion of like any form of definition.
And
but
destination is parallel to it, right?
Yes, it is. Yes,
in his poem elsewhere, there's all that. Well, we came along for the ride in this section.
Yes.
Which is an idiom that kind of generally means, it's like a hijinks. Let's just go. I don't know where I'm going, but I'll do it with you.
Let's just roll with it.
Yeah.
So there's a sense of movement in ride, where in definition and destination, there's very much that sense of stasis.
Yeah.
That sense of you can be contained in these things, right, in a destination or a definition. But going along for the ride is a whole other matter, and yet also dangerous, I think. Because if you go along for the ride in the enemy alien truck, that's not really a very nice truck to find yourself riding in.
No, indeed. Yeah. I think we're right in reading this. We're leaping to a kind of psychobiographical reading, but I think it's completely appropriate.
I tend to go there with Roy.
Yeah, and I think... Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just think there is really that sort of sense of, a connection to a life lived. But he's also a poet, right? And a critic and a theorist, and a really good one. Yeah. And so he knows what language is, and he understands its instabilities and the problems and the possibilities of opening language.
Yeah.
But he also is not, I think, he's not that kind of formalist poet that holds pure form as an ideal.
Right.
Because he comes out of this incredible history that's brutal, that's traumatic, that's profoundly material, and it can't not be grounded somewhere.
Yeah.
And so then there's that movement, kind of through the referentiality of language to the material world.
Right.
But then there's also a recognition that the language itself is its own substance.
Yeah. So in section 6, he's got 3 command verbs asking us to imagine. Or maybe he's asking us to imagine something that he's been through.
Yes.
But imagine a nest of circuitous roots. So that's either language theory, because we're getting to definitions.
Right.
Or it's about dispossession, dislocation, and wandering.
I think
right?
It's probably
both.
Yeah.
So then you have this nest of circuitous roots, which is totally the poetry.
Yes.
There's nothing definitional about the poetry.
No, that's right. And I think the poetry is always trying to slip away from the work of definition.
Right.
Because I think for him there's liberatory possibility there.
Right.
But the nest of circuitous roots is such an interesting it's such an interesting couplet. It offers such an interesting sort of set of images in a way because it's open. Mm-hmm. So a nest, right, is where a bird makes its home. But birds are these critters of flight. Mm-hmm. And then to think about the circuitous roots, because a nest is a round thing made of all these threads, straws and threads, and whatever debris that a bird will pick up. Yeah. We had a robin nesting in our eaves trough last summer, and so I was looking at the nest. But the nest goes round in a circle. And so there are all these entangled, right? These roots entangled in a nest that makes a home.
Right.
It's a brilliant couple of lines.
I'm so glad we focused on this, because what you're talking about is, from my recent experience reading Roy Miki from start to finish, this is such an important topic for him. So home is never quite not dislocation, going along for the ride. Yeah. So nest is by definition home.
Yes.
There's no nesting here, and there's no nesting, whatever the linguistic poetic words equivalent of nesting is. Yeah. We are not getting that here.
No, we're not. He's trying to jettison that sort of static sense of language.
I really love imagine destination as A slew of words. You want to try that one? Destination is a slew of words.
So I think there what he's trying to do is, to think about the ways in which destinations, we imagine them as these, you're going on this great vacation. There's this wonderful destination holiday that you're going to do, right? And the company is going to sell you this perfect place, this ideal. Or Canada is going to sell you this perfect dream of citizenship.
Right.
Or you'll be repatriated to Japan, and there you will become a perfect Japanese subject and not have to worry about the mess of internment and all of that kind of stuff. But he's saying, no, all of these places, these seeming destinations, are unstable places produced through language, produced through ideology, produced through the sort of the definitional labor of these racist governments that with profoundly, nationalist imaginations attached to particular imaginations of race that want to take this body or that body and nail it down to that definition, that destination. Right. You belong in this destination.
That's right.
You belong in that one.
That's right.
And Roy is saying, no, the destination is a slew of words. It's created in language. The language produces the place. But language is unstable.
Right.
And so in the instability of language, then there's all this liberatory possibility that allows him to have his life, right?
And definition is, in fact, the perfect utility of language. I say pen, and it finds its way to pen, and we have a perfect, communication.
And until there's another pen.
Until there's another pen and a different pen. But the point is, that fantasy is blown up here.
Yes.
Because imagining definition is not simply misleading and kind of submitting to someone else's definition.
That's right.
But it's a booby trap. It's dangerous.
Yes. Yeah, right. Imagination is dangerous. We came along for the ride and we learned it's dangerous because it can still take you back to those essentialist places. Is that why?
Yeah, well, learning to abide is a real topic of this poem.
It is.
Adjustment, optics, fudging, and finagling.
That's right.
And they're all, in Miki's recent work, they're all attached to the consumerization of the British Columbian body.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. You guys are just about to head to Vancouver, and you'll see.
We are. We're in Seattle right now. I forgot to say.
Yeah.
We're 2.5 hours, maybe at best, south of Vancouver.
3 if there's a lineup at the border.
3 if there's a lineup at the border. And so it's kind of a Vancouverish scene behind us, but
kind of.
You're very attached to Vancouver.
I am.
Right, but we're in Seattle, it should be said.
It should be said.
And we're talking about a Vancouver poet.
Yes, that's right. And there's such different cities, because Seattle, it seems to me Seattle still feels like a very American city to me. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly what I mean by that, except for that I'll say when you get to Vancouver, you will encounter in a very profound way, I think, that work of commodity culture, like neoliberal commodity culture, the erasure of history, the building of all these shiny glass towers.
Right.
Everything's for sale, everything's shiny.
Yes.
And there's a relationship to Asian capital which is fraught.
Right.
And a lot of kind of racial language and just mess that kind of, so he's dealing with that too.
And in fact, we could have picked other poems that are specifically about Vancouver.
Yes.
And that gentrification and commodification of Vancouver places.
That's right.
With respect to Japanese Canadians and also to First Peoples.
That's right.
So that's a very important part, and it's in here as well. What I thought we might do before we turn to section 4, which is about dispossession.
Yes.
Let's fill in a little more about the biography. So he was born in Manitoba, and to second-generation Japanese Canadian parents.
That's right. So he's Sansei. He's third generation.
Third generation.
Right, and born in internment.
Born into internment.
That's right. So his family was displaced from the coast. They are, I believe, their roots are kind of in the Mission area, like the Haney area, which is now a suburb of Vancouver.
So basically Vancouver.
But in the day, it would have been a city.
They were brought to Manitoba.
That's
right. And they were not Manitoba people?
They were not Manitoba people.
So
they became Manitoba people.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting. So then he has been writing about this. He eventually did lots of degree getting in Vancouver at, Manitoba first, but then Simon Fraser, a PhD from UBC.
That's right.
So he's really Vancouver identified.
Very Vancouver identified.
In flow and in recent work, he's done a lot of work with color collages. A lot of them are personal photographs, but not only.
Yeah, that's right.
And there is a collage that precedes this poem,
yes,
which
right.
probably has to do with the poem.
I think they are related.
Yeah.
Although, I need to think about it a little bit more.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
But while I'm waking up your laptop, which has an image of this on it, would you tell us a little bit about what's in the image?
Sure. Okay. Maybe I'll say something quickly about the collages.
Of course, you'll have to touch the
password
password
right. I'll have to put my
in.
password. Yeah. There it is.
I'm going to put it here and see if we can get a good shot of it. We have a good shot of it. Do you want to? I don't know if you can see it, but do you want to describe?
I've got the little black and white here. I can probably talk about it a little bit. So this color collage is one from a series of collages that Roy has been working on since retirement. And what they do is they take, kind of as a general practice, what he's doing is he's taking historical photographs, many of them from the moment of internment, and superimposing them on contemporary spaces. So in this one, which for me is one of the most moving, I think, but they're all very, very moving. It's an image of Roy's family. So I think his mom, I believe it's his aunt, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. And his two siblings.
And then his siblings, I think there's three.
Tamara and Aaron.
Those are a niece and nephew.
In the top. Touring Vancouver or something.
That's right. But there's three siblings in the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And then what we don't see in this image, but what we learn if we hear Roy talk about it, is that in the photograph of his mother is pregnant with him.
Oh.
And this is the moment when they arrive at the place where they're interned over the course
goodness,
of the.
What a document!
Yeah, so they're interned at this place called Saint-Agathe, which is a small French-speaking town in Alberta, and they were sent, I believe, to the sugar beet farms.
Sugar beet, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
so that's what they were doing. And then the image at the top, and if you kind of see, it's better. My little black and white isn't very good, but in there he's really carefully blended that historical, quote unquote historical. Roy has interesting ways of thinking about time, so I don't even know if we can use that word historical. But that image, from the internment moment of Saint-Agathe, and then above it, it looks to me like False Creek, Vancouver.
Right.
And it's his niece and nephew visiting, and that's the neighborhood where Roy lives currently. I think it's a little bit hard to tell in this image.
So it's a powerful image of internment, displacement, and the beginnings of dispossession, which is, ironic isn't quite the right word, but I can't think of another one, which is ironic given that the child in utero is going to be the poet who writes about this dispossession. But for him, that was his location. That's his origin.
So he's literally kind of born into the moment.
He's born into dispossession and dislocation.
That's right.
He is always already dispossessed.
That's right.
So why don't we look at section 4? I'll reread it, and I would love for you to say what you want to say about this way dispossession is framed. Again, as we both pointed out, definition being a booby trap, he's never going to give it to us straight.
No, he's trying to slip away from that.
Slip away for reasons that we don't have any right to speculate. That's his private business. But also, poetically, how dare any poet wanting to talk about this define it, objectively. The fulcrum I is the beginning of the next section. There's the I is defined by all kinds of time registers, all kinds of tones,
that's right.
all kinds of points of view.
There are all these state attempts to kind of control the I and its movement. And of course, for Roy, the I is a very slippery, slippery critter. He always uses the little I, and I think he uses it intentionally.
Yeah.
In that psychoanalytic sense, to not make it like the big ego I, but rather it's this I that's constantly kind of, constantly in flux, constantly in production, constantly shifting and moving, and different at different times, and present or absent at different times as well, depending on the container. That people are trying to push it into, or those moments of agency, or as he says, agency, that might erupt up at any particular moment
Yeah.
to do different kinds of
Right.
agented or sometimes even political labor.
So disjunctive writing is politically and ethically responsible.
It can be.
In a situation where the state has defined the I, where the commodification of Vancouver, which is a sort of ideal place for him in relation to his birth dispossession, cannot be described by some straightforward relationship to the urban space. He has studied William Carlos Williams, who doesn't inform his poetry so much as the idea, but he adds to it this particular political point of view.
That's right.
About the multiple I. So anyway, let's look at this. I was not aware of the dispossession, which could simply be a biographical statement.
I was not aware of the disposition.
The disposition, sorry. Dispossession comes up. I was not aware of the dispossession kept in storage. All we received, held as our own. It was the zone of least resistance, which may relate to learning to abide. Right? Now that we know, and we don't know what we know, but now that we know, let's hit the road again. Let's go along for the ride.
There's so much going on.
Yeah, let's just talk a little bit about it.
Okay. So I was not aware of the dispossession kept in storage. Dispositions are feelings, right? But it's also literally a disposition, a position that's not a position.
Right. It's a pun.
Yeah.
Right?
He loves the
it's
pun.
It's an attitude and a stance.
That's right.
But also a displacement.
Yeah, that's right. And then he elides and slips quickly into dispossession, and of course orally. They're very, very close, disposition.
Like destination and definition.
That's right. So there's this cousin relationship in sound that produces these slippages in meaning that are so curious. So I was not aware of the disposition, so the disposition of the dispossession, how I would feel about the dispossession, but also the displacement, the way in which the position that I might have been born in Haney, is taken away in the moment of birth, and replaced by a dispossession. The position becomes dispossession, rather than locatedness, rather than destination, definition. Wow. Right?
Yeah.
That's what's going on there.
You're really good at this. You've obviously thought a lot about this. So, Larissa, he's saying, there's a little story here. I was not aware it was kept in storage. I didn't know it was in storage. I had to find it. And this follows literally the next page after a collage, which is a really amazing document of the dislocation.
Yeah.
Which is the moment his family was interned and arrived in Manitoba.
That's right.
So I wasn't aware it was kept in storage.
Yeah.
All we received, held as our own. It was the zone of least resistance.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't, as so many people interned didn't do in Europe and in North America. They didn't fight back. They didn't resist. But this produced a certain documentary history.
Yes.
Now that we know,
That's
we know,
right.
we know.
To be fair, I think there were some who did fight back.
And in Europe as well, obviously. But mostly,
the mood was to not. And there's an essay which I should have looked up before I came, and I didn't, so I just looked at it just before I arrived. But this whole notion of shikata ganai, it doesn't matter, or just let it pass,
Right.
Was a mood, I think, of the displacement of JCs among the displacement. As good Canadian citizens, right?
Right.
We don't resist our own government.
Right.
If they say something's good for us, if it's good for the country,
Right.
it's good for us.
Yes.
So if it's good for the country and good for us, we should do it. Why should we resist?
Right.
Because we're good Canadians.
Right.
But as a consequence, they don't fight back against this terrible injustice, actually. Some did fight back. And I think it's really important to remember that. And certainly Roy and his brother Art, in the aftermath, they were also two of the major architects of the redress, right?
Yes, he was one of the leaders of the redress movement.
And so that's, yeah.
Really important.
It is
fact.
It is really important.
Larissa, go ahead.
Oh,
please.
well, there's so much going on in what you've pointed out, Al. So it was, all we received held as our own. So important to remember historically that when the people were dispossessed, all their possessions were taken.
Yeah.
Right? And so all the stuff, all the things that they had, the beautiful orchards, the gardens, cars, houses, all the property was taken and held in trust by the, shoot, I can't remember what it was called, but it was like the Office of the Enemy Aliens or something really racist and terrible that held and eventually sold off all people's stuff for like cut rate. So all we received held as our own is actually all we received, but also all that was taken held as our own in the sense that we're citizens, but actually taken from us as Japanese.
That's a great reading of that. That's definitely what that's about.
So that's
a poet who is involved in the redress movement would be thinking about that almost as a matter of ownership and of finance.
Yes.
Really, which is, of course, a pervasive sub-theme
Yes.
of all this. I want to turn to the title, which is powerful, and then I want to broaden out slightly to Roy Miki's major concern in the last 10 years, if you can tell from the poems, about how, for lack of a better term, and this is actually his term in another poem, neural paths, our way of thinking, our neural paths, are altered by the economic and therefore the ecological environment as well. And he doesn't explore it fully in this poem, but in section 2 a little bit, and it's just very, from what I can tell about all the reading of Vancouver poets, that's such a major issue. And how can his experience as a dispossessed Canadian how can he speak directly to this question of the way we think neural paths are being changed by the way the state relates to our position with respect to the water and with respect to the spot. And but we'll defer that for a second to talk about the title, I Hear You.
Okay, but that's so brilliant. I want to talk about it.
Oh, you want to go ahead? Let's go right to it.
Let's go
right
gosh.
to it.
Okay.
Let me read section 2, and you can close read it. We lie down at peace, our lobes on loan. Right, so there's finance, the way our thinking is affected by finance. Credit rules the nest. There's the nest.
There's the nest again.
Seeped into channels. I believe those are not just ecological Vancouver channels, water moving through, but also neurally.
Right.
And then don't mess with it.
Yeah.
And then the next section is all about fault, which I assume is also about default. Anyway, what can you make of our lobes on loan?
That.
Credit rules the nest, which is very punny and typical of him.
Very punny, and you're right, so typical. So our lobes on loan, left lobe, right lobe. So he's talking about the brain, but on loan to, so that's finance.
Right. And in the first stanza we dig deeper than our competitors. Pliancy, there it is, getting along, going along, right?
Yeah,
adjustment.
that's right.
Pliancy forever is our motto. Waist deep in whatever, anytime now, raise your hand, finagle it. So there's fudging. We consume, ergo, we fudge.
Yeah, that's right.
He's very critical of the way capital is working.
Absolutely, and when you go to Vancouver, you'll see that it's a,
really? What will
it's a
we
full
see?
metal city of capital flows. So when the title of the compendium is flow, he's thinking about watery flow, the flow of subjectivity, but he's also thinking about capital flows.
Yeah.
For sure, he must be.
Yes.
And so here, it seems to me that's also being taken up. Credit rules the nest, so you have all those sort of circuitous pathways that are making that home we were talking about earlier, where the bird of flight sits, but surrounded by this work of movement. So here it's also the movement of capital flow. Our home is made by capital flows as much as the flows of body, the flows of sort of subjectivity, and this fragment seems to be catching that. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. It goes with his concern with cloudiness, fog, non-transparency. These are poetically and aesthetically good things, right? As opposed to that kind of definitional clarity.
That's right.
Right. Oblique truth is the second and third words of this poem. So, and flow is fog, cloud. The book is called Cloudy and Clear.
Yes.
So you've got that kind of proper Vancouver cloudy.
That's right.
Right. But then you have the flow of capital.
Yes.
And the question is, how can a experimental poet embrace cloudiness and fog and not fall prey to the capital flow, which is obscuring things?
That's right.
This is the dilemma.
Well, my sense is that we do fall prey to it. that there's no way of escaping being the prey of capital flow, especially not in a city like Vancouver, where everything, like every breath you take, is monetized, right? So the clouds, we breathe them in. It's so damp like this. It's so damp. You breathe in the water, you breathe in the flow.
Right.
And that breath is already, there's money, there's money caught up in it.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we get to be free and clear. And I think, free and clear, we don't get to be cloudy. We get to be cloudy and clear, but not free and clear, maybe something like that.
The dilemma of the experimental poet in a politically charged, economically charged situation is, shall I continue to be devoted to non-straight language, to language that appropriately obscures, when it's possible it will simply turn into fudging and finagling that benefits the bullshitters and the advantage takers. That's the dilemma of an experimental poet.
One of the mid-career books was called Surrender.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think he was thinking about that.
Yeah.
That there reaches a point where it's just like you have to you have to let go of the rope. You have to go with the flow. It's shikata ganai again. There's nothing that can be done about it, which is so disturbing.
Yes. And it's legitimately in this poem. I mean, there are 4 instances where going with the flow, even though the word flow isn't used, is here. So let's turn to I Hear You as the title.
Yeah.
Lots going on there.
Yeah.
Let's riff together on what it might mean.
Okay. Okay, I hear you. First of all, it's a colloquialism. You're hanging out, someone's saying, do you hear what I'm saying? Do you hear what I'm saying? Da, 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 and they're rambling on you. Like, you have no idea what they're saying. But you want to make friends, so you say...
Oh, so it's a lie. I hear you, but I hear what you're saying, but I don't, actually.
Or it could be I do hear you. Like, you're not actually being particularly lucid, but I feel you.
Okay.
So I get it, even though I don't really...
Oh, I like that. Okay.
I don't know. Does that...
I don't know. That works. I mean, the first definition is just plain old unironic empathy.
Right.
Like, I do hear you.
Yes.
Okay. Then so that's one, and the second is the one you talked about, which is very complicated. I want empathy. I want to do empathy here, but I can't buy into what you're saying.
Because you're rambling on, whatever, as Roy is rambling on, right?
Yes.
So I want the empathy, but the language will not allow that transparent relationship.
Yes.
And especially in such a tangled nest.
Yes.
Right? Like, how in such a tangled nest can I actually hear you?
Mm-hmm.
But yet perhaps I can, because we feel a sort of in the cloudiness, a kind of a sense of being together in the nest or in the cloud. And so maybe I do actually hear you, even though definitionally, like, or that sort of capacity for language, the language and its transparency is not available. And yet there's another way in which I can hear you in the nest, in the hot mess, right, that you're not supposed to mess with. I don't know. You think?
Let's do it. I do think. Let's do the third one.
Okay.
The third one is literally, there is a voice, and there's an I who hears you. There is a voice.
Right.
Hearing. And in the third section, the voice says, and then there's that riffing on fault. Fault is not ours, fault done in... Talk about redress. Fault is not ours, fault done them in, fault never lies, fault has its confidants, fault revels, not reveals.
Yes.
Okay, so the voice of authority in a typical poem, a poem in which the definitions are not a booby trap, traditional poetry.
Right.
Right? The voice of God, V-O-G, is the voice that's telling the truth.
Yes.
And this is not that. The voice, in a poem called I Hear You, I is the fulcrum I. That's Roy's wandering nest I.
The nested I.
The nested I. You.
Who is you? Who is the you?
The bullshitter who's talking to you, or maybe...
The state.
The state, or maybe the people from his past that he's collaging.
Yeah.
The voice says, fault is not ours. In a poem about capitulation.
Yeah, fault is not ours. So, I mean, the fault... The first way I receive that is the fault is that's the state speaking. Fault is not ours. We did the best for the country.
Good,
it's not our fault. But I don't know, do you hear something else there? Like...
Well, it changes. The voice is also multivocal, which is why I wanted us both to read the poem, because I think that each section has its own voice.
Right. Because also the fault, of course, in Vancouver, it's a subduction zone. So it's also, any time, like the earthquake.
Fault lines.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. And then there's default.
And then there's default.
There's a lot of default.
On loans, on what we cop to when we don't know what else to do.
Right.
So shikata ganai again, right? Like there's
Right.
nothing to be done about it.
Yeah.
So we default to what seems to be best for the country. I think there's more going on in there though, but it's so hard because his language is so open in a way, you know?
Marvelously open.
Yeah, and then it sort of lets you kind of put on it whatever it is that you're hearing.
Yeah. Larissa, we could go on and on about this because it's just so, and of course we could have picked any number of other poems. Let's take each maybe 2 turns round for final thoughts. Anything else you wanted to say about this poem or about Roy Miki that you haven't had a chance to? You go first, I'll go, and then we'll go 2 more times.
Okay. So the one thing that I would really like to hit the table, because it's something that I've been thinking about a lot, when he talks about this image, he talks about it in relation to this notion of remembering the future. And he thinks about himself in Santa Gath, in his mother's womb, in a sense remembering the visit of the niece and nephew, which in kind of the time of linear progress is in the future. So this notion of remembering the future, I think maybe it's related to the nest, you know, that there's an other sense of time at work in this poem. There's an other temporality. And in the collages, you get that even more so, right? These co-temporalities of moments that we might think of as historical and contemporary.
Right.
And in the collages, and I think in the poem as well, he's trying to make an engagement with this sense of permeating time, where I don't even want to say narratives, but that sense of being the I in movement is also kind of inhabiting a kind of continuous present. And I don't know what to do with that more than that. You know, for me, the whole spec fiction thing is a huge deal. And so I'm trying to think about Roy remembering the future as a way of Roy doing spec fiction, because he is. And we get that even more. They're mannequins in other poems, so these sort of cyborg figures. And so there's that sense of Roy speculating, and then the speculation is connected to financial speculation. It's so...
I think this won't count as my final word. What you just said made me think of something. Of all the Vancouverish poems I've been reading lately to prepare for our visit out here to the West Coast, Roy Miki seems to be the one who has mixed the racialization of some Canadians and the hyper consumption of the city, of the coastal city, and the climate change and its relation to that coastal city. Those 3 things come together in an incredible way that this poem gets us started on. But you know,
that's right.
Well, that leads me to the point I wanted. The first of my final thoughts is this concept of Roy Miki's called Broken Entries. And it's the title of his essay collection.
That's right. One of them.
And it's the phrase that I wrote down here: racialized subjectivity and the deconstruction of racism connects with a punning, very languagey, broken entry technique in the poetry. And I think this poem is a great example of the broken entry technique. And entry is such a great word because it's partly about locating, moving, destination, getting somewhere.
Right.
Entry, or blocked entry.
That's right.
And entry-based sections, as if diary entries from a personal past, the fulcrum I. Each section seems to be an entry in a journal about one's own cloudy past.
That's right.
So I just wanted to put out there broken entries is a really great phrase for readers of his poetry.
It is. There's that whole relationship to Haibun and Roy Keuka's work as well. And Roy Keuka was such a poetic diarist, right? In that sense. That's going on there as well. Of course, broken entry is also thievery.
Oh, breaking an entry. Oh, yeah. All right, your turn. Another final. This is your last final thought.
Oh, my gosh. Okay, my last final thought. I guess, one other thing that I would really like to say, because Roy Miki is such an important poet for me, important poet, important critic, an important friend and colleague. And for me, there's very much a sense in the whole compendium in Roy's body of work about the production of a Vancouver, of a Pacific Northwest, I want to call the ocean in there, that makes Asian bodies and histories present. It also makes relationships with, indigenous folks in the land, and also black folks and black movement kind of up and down this coast, present for me in a habitable way, I think, in a way that without Roy and his work and his presence, I wouldn't be able to have my, interestingly, feet on the ground in quite the same kind of way.
You yourself personally as a poet and as a thinker.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
He's important to me in that way.
I'm glad you said that. My final thought is about a section we didn't talk about, which is the 7th section where we hear music and we hear, I'll refine your tongue, that wretched corset of a sentence. Now this follows nicely from the imagined destination as a slow words, imagined definition as a booby trap. I love how here, instead of just a plain old pun on refrain, we have refrain as in abiding, learning to abide, going with the flow, being willing to hit the road again. Refrain as in reticence.
Right.
But he substitutes, instead of just creating a pun, he substitutes, I'll refrain, I mean refine. And the relationship between refraining and refining being torquing, working, refinement of language. This is refined language, even though the topics are raw and wide open and traumatic.
Yeah.
It's a refined kind of writing, and I love the relationship between refrain, which is a poetic repetition, a chorus, and refinement of the tongue. It just makes me think that, as so many poets of this generation, Creeley is a little older, but I think of Creeley's dislike of the sentence because it's so much like a prison sentence,
right.
the corset of a sentence.
Yeah.
And I think that's another example of Roy Miki saying, yeah, I know this language isn't going to work, but I'm going to continue to refine it, and it's not refraining. I'm not refraining from saying what I want to say.
That's right.
At all.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. Larissa, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
for
you
doing
so
this.
much,
The poem is called I Hear You, and you can find it in Flow, published by Talon Books.
2018.
2018.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you so much.